Many people know that Rostov-on-Don is considered the criminal capital of the USSR, but few people know thanks to which personalities the city maintained this status. Today we will talk about the most famous gang not only of Rostov, but of the entire Soviet Union. For 20 whole years after the war years in the USSR they did not remember the word banditry, until these crazy raiders appeared. The fact is that the Ministry of Internal Affairs confidently believed that it had eradicated this type of crime to the ground, but when just such movie robberies began to occur in Rostov, the whole country shuddered. The basis for the effectiveness of this gang was several principles, which the group followed impeccably. Members of the gang have never collaborated with professional criminals, not without reason, believing that many criminal authorities are actually informants for the country's law enforcement system. The next important point: in Soviet times, the black market as such did not exist. For this reason it was extremely difficult to purchase firearms, but the leader of this organized crime group had a remarkable mind and many talents. Thanks to this, the bandits began to create their own weapons, from pistols to machine guns with hand grenades. Later, when the entire gang is arrested, experts from the KGB of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of the USSR will note that homemade weapons produced by criminals in makeshift conditions have no analogues in world practice, and some of the bandits' ideas are of particular interest. We will talk about the gang of Tolstopiatov brothers. It was one of the most unusual and brutal criminal groups. Their gang kept Rostov-on-Don in fear for 5 whole years, from 1968 to 1973, and abroad they were nicknamed the first gangsters of Russia, because the Tolstoy-Piatov gang had no analogues in the criminal history of the USSR. These notorious bandits have only 14 proven armed robberies, involving cashiers of government agencies, banks, and enterprises, with killed and wounded on their conscience. In total, they embezzled 150,000 rubles through robbery, a huge amount at that time, because a Soviet engineer received 120 to 200 rubles a month. Separately, it is worth noting the unprecedented courage of ordinary Soviet citizens. In almost all cases of robberies, they resisted the bandits, despite the weapons in their hands, some even risking their own lives to pursue the robbers. Yes, you won't see anything like this these days, so let's talk about everything in order. The leader of the gang was a certain Vyacheslav Tolstopiatov. Born in 1940, he was an unusually talented person. His life of crime began with a hobby of drawing, sketching and designing. As a child, this boy loved to draw illustrations from books. Moreover, he did this very thoroughly, achieving an impeccable resemblance. When the boy was 15 years old, an interesting thought occurred to him: should he try to switch from books to banknotes? And this turned out to be his first criminal talent. Slavik drew banknotes of 50 to 100 rubles perfectly. After that, he ran to the store, bought some kind of trinket. Upon leaving the store, he threw away the trinket, and put the change from the counterfeit money in his pocket. Another way for Vyacheslav to sell counterfeit money was to ride in a taxi, where, using the dimness of the car's interior, Tolstopiatov paid for the trip, and again put the change in his wallet. But one day he came across an attentive taxi driver named Medalitsa, who discovered the counterfeit and immediately took the counterfeiter to the nearest police station. There, Vyacheslav Tolstopiatov did not deny it and immediately confessed to everything. An interesting case was documented at the regional department during an investigative experiment. The arrested Tolstopiatov was given colored pencils, watercolors, BF2 glue, a compass, a ruler and a blade. In just 4 hours, the future crime star drew an absolutely exact copy of an old ruble bill. All the policemen in the experiment gasped. They had never seen anything like this before. Although the article for counterfeiting banknotes is a serious crime, to the surprise of the investigators, Tolstopiatov was given only 4 years of imprisonment in a general regime colony, as it later turned out that the court was in vain to take pity on the guy. Because 4 years was clearly not enough for him to realize his guilt and his future life. After leaving the colony, Slavik wanted a lot of money, and he immediately began organizing his own gang, with the goal of robbing savings banks and enterprises. At the beginning, he enlisted the support of his older brother Vladimir Tolstoypiatov, who provided his house as the headquarters of the future criminal group. The third member of the gang was Tolstoypiatov's childhood friend Vladimir Gorshkov. Another person was needed to implement the leader's plans, and Vyacheslav was lucky. One day he met his former cellmate Sergei Somosyuk in a wine store, who, having listened to Tolstoypiatov's proposal, immediately agreed, noting that it was better to die on a bag of money than near a wine barrel. Ironically, this character will later die from a gunshot wound while lying on a pile of money. After organizational issues, the bandits got down to business. In the house of the elder Tolstoypiatov, they built a secret workshop, the entrance to which was hidden in a special way, with the help of a scrolling mirror. The assembly of weapons began according to the drawings of Tolstoypiatov Jr. The criminals ordered the missing parts to their friends who worked at defense enterprises in Rostov-on-Don, in particular in Ligmash and Pryber, and explained such orders as repairing household appliances. As a result, the bandits created with their own hands 6-7 charging revolvers, 5 small-caliber folding pistols, machine guns of a unique design, several combat grenades, as well as body armor. It is noteworthy that Vyacheslav Tolstoypiatov, who had a criminal record, was able to get a job at a Dosov shooting range, where he could steal 14 packs of cartridges, 700 pieces, for future raids. Subsequently, investigators admitted that the gang's tactics were at that time advanced for the criminal world of the USSR. And the degree of its development inevitably provokes comparisons with the actions of Chicago gangsters, urban guerrillas, and intelligence agencies. These tactics included a perfectly competent bank robbery, hostage-taking, observation and collection of information after the action, evasion of pursuit, conspiracy, preparation of an alibi, retraining, conservative treatment and disguise. For personal disguise, gang members used women's stockings, which is why they received the nickname Fantomash in Rostov. The main characters in the robbery were the younger Tolstoypiatov, Gorshkov, and Samosyuk. The elder Vladimir Tolstoypiatov had a special role. He never participated directly in the robberies themselves. During the attack, he was nearby and watched what was happening, and then monitored the actions of the police officers who arrived at the scene. After the robbery, Tolstoypiatov Sr. analyzed the actions of both the bandits themselves and the police officers with a detailed analysis of mistakes and conclusions for the future. In addition, he was considered a kind of spiritual father in the gang. It was he who was able to calm the members of the group when they wavered in spirit after the first murder they committed. Tolstoypiatov Sr. managed to find the right words for the killers, convincing them that they had been baptized in blood and there was no turning back. We will not list all the robberies committed by the Tolstoypiatov gang, but will focus only on the most resonant ones. It is worth admitting that this gang had a lot of persistence. The fact is that despite all the equipment and thoughtfulness of the criminals, their first robbery turned out to be extremely unsuccessful. The first in line for robbery was the Rostov regional branch of the State Bank of the USSR. They monitored the bank for several months, visited the operating room, and tracked down the cashiers who, on the same day, came to the bank to get money to pay wages at enterprises. The date of the robbery was chosen as October 7, 1968. The bandits had a carefully thought-out plan. One of them stopped the car and gave the address where he needed to go. During the trip, the passenger allegedly accidentally saw his acquaintances and asked him to stop and give them a lift. After that, they were supposed to seize the car and throw the driver into the trunk. And so it happened. Tolstoypiatov stopped the Volga, picked up friends, but failed to capture the driver. He was able to run out of the car and began loudly calling for help. The bandits were forced to flee the scene, after which they abandoned the car near the actor's house. The next day, in order to calm the hype around the theft, Tolstoypiatov Jr. resorted to a trick. He called the police from a payphone, told where the Volga was parked, and also said that it was a friendly prank, and that the driver was scared of a water pistol. Law enforcement officers returned the car to the driver in good condition, and the criminal case was dropped. After such a failure, the robbers began to lose heart. Something had to be done. Out of hopelessness it was decided to rob a grocery store in the village of Mirny, part of the city of Rostov-on-Don. After several days of observation, we found out that the collectors collect the proceeds by 19.00, the robbery was planned for 18.30. For this purpose, Tolstoyatov Jr. asked his colleague from work, Boris Ovchinnikov, to give him his Gaz 51 company car for one day, supposedly for transporting things. Having stopped the car on a parallel street, the bandits entered the grocery store. Before entering, they pulled women's stockings over their heads and, upon entering the store, opened fire on the ceiling from a machine gun. Visitors to the grocery store rushed into the waste, but the saleswoman was not at a loss, and in the confusion she was able to hide the main proceeds of 6,000 rubles in a safe and threw away the key to it. Much to the disappointment of the robbers, they had to make do with only what was left in the cash registers. The raiders' loot amounted to 526 rubles. Then the unexpected happened. When the robbers began to leave, war veteran Gory Kumakov, armed with a piece of pipe, ran after them, but he was unable to stop the bandits. Vyacheslav Tolstoyatov fired a burst of machine gun fire at him. Kumakov died on the spot. At home, having counted the money, the bandits were furious. They had to come up with something again. The first successful robbery from frostbitten bandits occurred on November 26, 1968. On this day, wages were issued in all automobile enterprises in the city, etc. The raiders decided to act on the first option, take someone's car and commit a crime with it. Gorshkov stopped the GA-69 of the Rostov Radio Technical School and asked to be taken to the training ground of the Rostov Civil Engineering Institute. When the car drove past the zoo, Gorshkov, as if by chance, noticed his comrades and asked them to give them a lift as well. The unsuspecting driver Valentin Kushnerev agreed and Samosyuk and Tolstoyatov sat in the back seat. On the way, the Fantomash attacked the driver, pulled him out of the car, tied him up and threw him into the back seat. After that we went to the state bank. Upon arrival, we saw OTK5 cashier Matviva and ran up to her. They snatched the shopping bag containing the money. After that, the robbers fled. At home they calculated the loot and the total was 2,700 rubles. The next attempt was to seize the salaries of workers at a chemical plant named after the October Revolution. This episode indicates a qualitatively different stage in the gang's activities. Just the day before, Samosyuk was sent to prison for being a drunken hooligan. The Tolstoyatovs began to look for a replacement for him, and at the same time expanded the staff of the gang. The Tolstoyatovs now had observers and signalmen, whose job was to notice the car with the cashier in time and give a sign to those who were directly about to carry out the attack. The raiders went to the chemical plant for a long time, under the pretext of getting a job, during which time they found out on what day the cashiers arrived with their salaries. On the scheduled day, the whole gang each took their place near the plant. But when the car with the collector arrived, the unexpected happened. The cashier with a bag of money suddenly escaped from the robbers and ran towards the entrance. At the same time he pulled out his service revolver and began firing at the bandits. At the same time, the second driver of the cash-in-transit vehicle, unafraid of the armed criminals, rushes at Gorshkov and snatches the machine gun from him. Tolstoyatov Jr. fires several shots at the driver, who falls wounded. In a seized collector's truck, the robbers fled the scene, followed by a short pursuit by the plant's security, during which Gorshkov received a gunshot wound in the back. After this failure the bandits lay low for a long time. Gorshkov's wounds turned out to be serious, and besides, Samosyuk was supposed to be released from prison in a year and a half. On August 25, 1971, robbers attacked the cashier of the construction organization UNR 112. As always, putting women's stockings on their heads, they entered the Enterprise building at the moment the cashier left the office. Again, in the spirit of gangster films, they fired warning shots upward and took a bag with money from the cashier Gorbusheva, who was accompanied by Chief Engineer Marchenko and driver Luna. It turned out to be 17,000 rubles. When the bandits went outside, they stole a parked bus and fled on it. It was a success and the criminals walked for several months. The next raid took place on December 16, 1971. It was a savings bank number 0299, located on Pushkinskaya Street. When a car with collectors drove up to the savings bank, the robbers jumped up to it and demanded that they get out of the car. Collector Dezikov obeyed and got out. And the second collector, named Jayuba, pulled out his service pistol and began to shoot at the criminals, while the bullet again hit Gorshkov, whom Tolstoypyatov Jr. had already begun to call the bullet catcher. The Fantomas shot the collector Jayuba, took possession of the car and fled in it. They got 20,000 rubles in collection bags. The Tolstoypyatov gang committed its last robbery on June 7, 1973. Their target was the Yuzhgiprovodkaz Design Institute. The bandits dispersed throughout the institute building. Cashier Ponomareva arrived at the institution with a heavy backpack containing 124,000 rubles. The raiders ran up to her with revolvers, took her bag and went outside. To their surprise, the institute's employees ran after them and indignantly demanded their money back, not paying attention to the robbers' weapons. At the very exit, the raiders were ensured by Tolstoypyatov Jr., who, seeing a crowd chasing the robbers, opened fire and killed an employee of the Martovitsky Institute. This shot played a decisive role in the further existence of the gang. Unfortunately for the raiders, Police Sergeant Alexei Rusov was located near Yuzhgiprovodkaz. Immediately taking his bearings from the sounds of gunfire, he ran to the institute. Having arrived, he fired several warning shots as he walked, and then began shooting at the robbers. Policeman Rusov turned out to be a good shooter. He managed to wound Gorshkov and Samasiuk. The bandits stopped a passing Muscovite, threw out the driver and tried to escape in this car. But fortune had already turned its back on them. The political officer of the fire department, Salyutin, and his driver Doroshenko, who happened to be nearby and observed the shootout, put Rusov in their car and began to pursue the raider. Courageous pursuers were able to overtake and neutralize the criminal, despite Tolstoypyatov's threats to open fire on them from a machine gun. In the Muscovite, on a bag of money, lay the already dead Samasiuk, the same one who once said a phrase that turned out to be prophetic: "It is better to die on a bag of money than near a wine barrel." There is another interesting fact in this story. The heroic police sergeant Alexei Rusov became the favorite of the current Minister of Internal Affairs, Nikolai Shilokov. He awarded the sergeant the extraordinary rank of lieutenant, and personally presented him with a golden badge for excellent police officer, a cash prize and a valuable gift, a transistor radio, and his name was entered in the Book of Honor of the USSR Ministry of Internal Affairs. After this, journalists dubbed Rusov with the loud nickname Policeman of the Soviet Union No. 1. As for the Tolstoypyatov gang, the Soviet gangsters got what they deserved. Vyacheslav and Vladimir Tolstoypyatov, as well as Gorshkov, were sentenced to death. 8 more accomplices of the robbers were sentenced to imprisonment for various terms. All the bandits' cassation appeals were rejected. On March 6, 1975, the Tolstoypyatov brothers and Vladimir Gorshkov were shot.